Right, before we jump into this week's video, I wanted to talk to you about Loudon Laserworks' latest Kickstarter. Now, they have sent me these beautiful, absolutely beautiful art pieces, which are laser-worked wood, and they're just stunning. I'm going to put this one over here, and that's very pretty, the vampire one. Then they've got this one over here, beautiful kraken in the middle, very nice nautical campaign. I'm going to put that one over there. And then they've got this one as well as many other options, by the way. Go check out the Kickstarter. Just gorgeous three-dimensional art pieces. And what are they for? Well, they're to store your mini. So you finished your campaign, your mini that you've beautifully painted and has survived and all those kinds of wonderful things. You now want to showcase them off. So you're going to hang them using this artwork, which is just gorge. You're going to hang it from the wall and immortalize your little PC. You're going to immortalize them forever so that they don't get forgotten in a drawer somewhere. I think it's lovely. And then on the back, you can write a little blog, a little history of what they did, what they achieved. I think it's just a wonderful way of displaying your artwork and saying, folks, this is a character that I adored, and this is a character that I want to showcase to the world in this just beautiful thing. Loudon Laserworks, go check them out. I think they're truly, truly cool. And speaking of campaigns, well, now on to what I think I did right or wrong in my own campaign. I'm breaking down the last 6 games that I have run, called the Duskmourn Chronicles on this channel. My mistakes, my successes, my wish I hads, and your questions. Stay with us. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of How to Be a Great GM. My name is Guy, and today I'm talking about hopefully putting into practice everything that I talk about on this channel with regards to the last 6 episodes of the Duskmourn Chronicles, which is my actual play of a D&D game that I run with my friends. And I'm breaking it up into 4 categories. Critical stuff, my tricks, things that I did that hopefully you noticed or that you can go back and look at and see, my mistakes, and then your questions. So those are the 4 things I'm going to be talking about. Figure out which one of those you want to watch. You can skip ahead and find them and all that kind of stuff. Critical stuff. So in that video that I did, creating a campaign out of an idea, that's where I outlined the idea that I had. This youthful heir to the throne was thrust into the care of the player characters, and they had to look after this heir whilst this big bad attacks the city. That was my complete idea, and then time travel got involved, and then doing stuff in the future got involved, and I was like, okay, cool. Well, that's where we sat. And so that's exactly what happened. I got a book. I love to get new books for each of my campaigns. I found this on Amazon. These 2 pages represent the totality of my campaign plan. Page number 1, the bad guy. Page number 2, some notes on the heir that has been saved. And that's it. When it came to playing the game, I realized that I had been so focused on setting up the technology to do the recording and getting the players to get in and come in and settle that I had actually forgotten to plan the first session. I didn't really know what I was doing. I knew that it had to be in the future. I knew that the players were going to have future characters because I asked them to make a level 15 character. Although I said it was to sort of give themselves a guiding path, they didn't realize that it was because I was actually going to have them play those characters. I knew it was going to be in a castle, so I had a castle map, which I had previously created using Dungeon Fog. Then I had some wooden pieces of castle, which I kind of arranged vaguely and went, okay, that kind of looks like a ruined castle. I had my bad guy, but then I realized that there were 4 of them, plus the king, who was going to be fighting this bad guy. And I didn't want it to just be them beating down on this really powerful bad guy. I thought that was going to be very boring, and I wanted to look at it and see if I could add in the 3 Ps, pain, pressure, or problem. And so that's exactly what I did. I said, okay, well, how do I make this painful, right? So all the monsters that are going to be here, all the things they're going to be fighting are going to do more damage than they normally do, or just lots of damage. We had some healing magic going on. The characters had some good armor classes, so I wasn't too fazed by that. In terms of the problem, I was like, well, how do I make it a problem that they need to get to this bad guy? Well, they're going to have some monsters in between. Okay, great. So I needed some monsters. I didn't have a plan. This was literally done 5 seconds before we pressed record on the cameras, and you first see it in episode 1. So I was like, okay, let me look into my box of minis, and I looked inside the box, and I found these 4 centaurs undead centaurs. And I was like, okay, those are cool. Those look nice. They're big, they're imposing, they're terrifying. They set the tone. The monster is a lich, so that's cool. So let's put these 4 in. And now what are they called? Do they have names? Where do they come from? Well, they serve the lich. They should probably have names. There's 4 of them. The 4 riders of the apocalypse, the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. These are centaurs, so let's give them those names. So then using famine, pestilence, war, and the other one, death, I gave them names that kind of came from that. Lord Fam for famine, Lord Warwick for war, things like that. That was cool. Do I have stat blocks for them? This was one of your questions. No, I don't. I just went, well, their armor class is, let's see, these are level 15 characters, so their armor class is 20 or 18, somewhere around about there. That seems about right. And the amount of damage they do is they get plus 15 to hit if they charge, and they'll do 2d10 plus 10 damage, or 2d10 plus 15 damage if they charge in, or whatever it was. I made it up at the time. But the thinking was, this is a set piece. This is part of the game that I, as the GM, am absolutely controlling to get us into the game. I am setting up the entire campaign, and you'll see what happened at the end. And then I needed my third P. I needed my pressure. Well, the castle is on fire. No one gives a damn. The king is fighting the lich. Yeah, still no one gives a damn. And that's where I came up with the idea that this ritual was being cast. The lich had foreseen this event coming up. There's all kinds of spells in D&D like divination and future sense and godly intervention, all that kind of nonsense, that the lich could have seen that this was coming up. Now, what I consciously did was, rituals will be interrupted if the caster is attacked and their concentration spells fail, and all those kinds of things. I didn't want that to get in the way. For all lack of a different term, this was railroading. It really, really was. I needed this thing to just be ticking down, and I wanted a visual way of representing it. So I put down the crystals as a countdown. So there was my pressure. So I had a problem, I had a pressure, and I had pain being dealt out. So it all came together in what I think was a fairly climatic battle where they were getting close to death and they were defeating the monsters and this sort of thing. Now, the event has happened. And just for clarity, the event has happened. Nobody went back in time. Everybody sent messages back to their past selves to receive. Now my job shifts. My job is now, okay, the bad guy sent this message back to his minions, kill the prince at all costs. That is now what I have to follow through as the GM. I have now got my 4 bad guys who will get these messages. Those 4 bad guys now have to enact upon those messages. They have to come up with plans based on their resources. So the very first one was Lord Fam, who was the steward to the family at the time that the game is set, 20 years in the past. So Lord Fam is there in human form. All right, he's not a centaur, mistakes coming up. He is in human form and he is running the castle. And so he is now fulfilling his requirement. Kill the prince at all costs. How's he going to do that? Well, he's going to come up with these dramatic monsters that are going to try and assassinate everybody. That fails because of the player character's interference. And so the entirety of everything that happened after that first event, everything that's happening in the present time, 20 years ago, that is all no longer in my control and is all made up on the fly. I can only come up with the plans that the bad guys are going to do when their plans that are currently in place are being destroyed, scuppered, or not working. So, what's Lord Fam doing? The heir has vanished. He's been taken by these individuals, according to his spies. The individuals have left. They are hiding in the city somewhere. What resources does he have? Okay, well, he's got the resources of the city guards. He's got the resources of his own weird alien monster-like things, which were a mistake, and I'll talk about those in a little bit. And he's got the resources of some dark magics, which I don't have to worry about just yet. So his personal goal is, I'm now in charge. I'm not going to jeopardize that by revealing that I'm an evil necromancer's minion. I am going to look as if I'm an upstanding citizen, so that when I take power, everyone just is happy and life carries on, and I can get stupidly rich and indulge in all of my own personal perversions, etc., etc. If it gets to a point where the city guard are ineffective, my next step will be to use the citizens and offer a bounty for the return of these individuals. And if I make that bounty a significant fee, which I can get back in taxation later, well, so be it. But I am not expending anything of my own resources, and I am also not really endangering my position. Lord Fam, in terms of the creature that I have created, famine. So there's starvation. There is gluttony of those that have versus those that have not. Lord Fam is not a heavy hitter. He is not going to go out and try and hunt down the player characters himself. He is, in this case, he is a chaser. He is chasing the party, and he's doing that by sending out minions because he won't get involved himself. So using that as my framework, I now know what Lord Fam is going to do. What is Lord Fam going to do if the player characters completely vanish? And if after 2 days the city has absolutely no sign of the prince? Well, that's something that I can only decide when it actually happens. What will Lord Fam do? I have some ideas. Lord Fam might start publicly haranguing those that are known associates. Send spies out in different directions. Where could they possibly have gone? So that's the critical stuff out the way. That's in a nutshell is what has been planned, has been executed, and has been done. Now, let's handle mistakes, because there were a few mistakes that I made, which I am digging myself out of slowly. Using the Centaur Undead was fun, and it made it visually interesting and terrifying for the players. Linking the Undead now to Lord Fam, who's now a human, it's a mistake insofar as I should have maybe had Lord Fam be a centaur, but that is problematic because there are not that many centaurs in Howden Lee, and it would be difficult to explain. How does Lord Fam go from being this living human to an undead centaur? Part of me has it that because he serves a lich, the lich may very well punish him for failing. I'm assuming he's going to fail. I mean, if the player characters get caught and the prince gets executed, my campaign is not over. My lich will now carry on with his plan to take over the world. Assuming Lord Fam fails, perhaps this is punishment that the lich bestows upon him. He turns him into this undead horse creature to serve him and his will. Another mistake that I made was the mind-blowing, head-blowing monsters. The king was assassinated in a dramatic way. His head exploded. I like exploding things. It's quite dramatic, and it certainly seemed to work. The players and the characters were both like, and then the queen's head exploded. They didn't seem to want to run away from just one of them. So I embellished and said there was 20 of them. This may have been overkill, and what it has done, from what I can see, is that my players are like, whoa, we cannot go back into the castle, we can't challenge Lord Fam, we can't shut this down, we have to escape. That's fair. That is an absolutely appropriate response to head-popping monsters. I went too far. I maybe should have had 5 or 6, but there was a risk that they would stay and fight, and that could have got messy. I didn't mind if they stayed and fought. I just was being too dramatic. What am I going to do moving forward? How do I correct this mistake? Well, I don't need to. All I need to do is say, well, Lord Fam has got these 20 head-popping monsters under his control. He doesn't want anyone to know that they're under his control. So he has, as far as I can see it, 2 options. Either he sends these out to look for the player characters, but they're assassins, they're not bounty hunters. His other option is to pull them back, to protect himself, because he's made a dangerous move this day. He has ordered the assassination of the king and the queen, and an attempted assassination of the prince. So he needs to protect himself. So I will pull them back most likely, and he'll use them as he needs to. I would say that he will probably use them poorly, because that's the one thing. I, as a GM, am sneaky and conniving and have watched hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of episodes of TV shows and read dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of books. I have a conniving mind, and so I could come up with some very creative ways of using them. But Lord Fam, he's not that smart. Those were the only 2 mistakes that I made that I need to fix. I made another mistake, which was I had read the backstory of the characters. My players sent through backstories, folks. They sent through wonderful, complex backstories that interlocked and interwove together. I did prompt them and say, hey, I would like you guys to know each other at the beginning so we don't go through the awkward inn where everyone is sitting and talking, hey, I couldn't join your party because I'm sitting here and you're sitting there. One of them, which I'm not going to tell you the full story, he is dead and was brought back from the dead. who killed him? Here's the little spoiler. Avery doesn't know. Scott knows, I think. So when the Lich offered to tell him this was me doing the whole temptation, dangle the carrot, blah, blah, blah. Let's just show the players that I have looked at their backstories, and let's start to hint at it, because the other players don't know this backstory. But just between Gottfried and between Avery. So it was an opportunity to insert a little bit of a, hey guys, I've done my homework as the GM. I've read your backstories. I'm cool. I'm hip. I'm down with that. What nearly went wrong was Avery then going, yeah, all right, I'll join you. And that was where I was like, oh, that's going to make an interesting campaign. That we have this character journeying through this whole story, and we know that they're going to become a traitor at the end. Because with Avery joining the enemy Lich, if the king was taken out, then quite possibly the pain that I had used was going to be too much, the problem was going to be too difficult, and the pressure was just going to tick over and happen, and nothing would resolve as I had hoped it to. So I didn't have to respond immediately to any of these mistakes that I've made, and now upon reflection, most of them can be actually turned into very interesting story opportunities or bits of information that I will use to make the story richer. So, tricks that I did, and I wrote them down because there were a few of them. I was controlling the pace the entire time. I wanted this to feel crazy, hectic, frenetic. I wanted this game to move. Because this is the opening gambit. This is the opening idea of the entire campaign, and I wanted it to be Michael Bayish. I wanted it to be exploding and terror and running and fear. I very specifically chose when to use maps and when not to use maps, theater of the mind. Most of it was theater of the mind. I only needed to use maps at very specific times when I wanted the pace to slow down a little bit, or when the players needed to have knowledge that their characters would have, but the players didn't have. And I didn't want it to be vague. We've now got a situation where we've got 4 players. They are in a little house in the city map that I made, and they now have to figure out what they're going to do. They needed a map for that, so I gave them one. I did not give them the time or the opportunity to really slow down too much. Again, I wanted to put pressure on them. I wanted them to move and for it to be a fun opening. My plan is not that the next batch of episodes is going to be slow and boring, but my plan is now we're into the thick of it. And now we want to know more about the characters. We want to know more about what's going on. We need some time to figure stuff out. As a movement, you can almost see these first 6 episodes as the introduction. The next 6 episodes are going to be the bulk of the adventure, what's going to happen, what's moving on. And then the last 6 episodes, because we do them in batches of 6, will then be the conclusion of that adventure. So over the course of 3 sessions of 6 hours or 18 hours, we've got our complete story arc. That's me not saying this will happen and there will be absolutely no deviation from this plan. It might come to a complete end in the very first hour of the very next session that we're playing this Saturday. It might not. But it's a guide for me to be able to look at it and go, oh, okay, cool. Now I can take the brakes off a little bit. I can give them some time to reflect and to see what's going on. Time, I've already mentioned this. I like the players to see time when time is important. Because if you tell the players, oh, you know, it's been 10 minutes, it doesn't mean anything. The player character is like, well, it's been some time. We don't have watches, so 10 minutes is like, what, a bit of a time between the 2 bells? Right, so the river rising in the dungeon. The reason why, when the player characters found the dungeon, that was me offering them alternatives. We know the city has been rebuilt multiple times. That's set down in the history and it was mentioned here and there. So sure, they found an old basement. I love these kinds of stories, especially here in London where a building is trying to put down a new basement and suddenly they discover an entire Roman city. Or they discover a church or something that's been forgotten about. And then I had done a short on anti-traps. You can explore this dungeon to your heart's content. The only trap is if you touch something, you die. And then I thought, well, let me fill it with stuff that the player characters are going to be interested in. This is by coincidence, and it's seeding stuff for the future. Now, the river, I had added it in because I was offering the players a way out. If they followed that little river, it would have opened up into the sewers, which would have taken them down into the harbor. That's quite a neat little escape. They didn't see it as that. They just saw it as a river and they were distracted by the books. That's perfectly fine because it allowed me later on, when my little prodding did not receive the effect that I wanted. I didn't want there to be a fight, but I like to tempt. I really do like to tempt. The river started to fill up and flood, which started to threaten. So I added in a problem with some pressure for the player characters to try and resolve, and they did. They stole the books. They've got a whole bunch of books, which I have to still write down, as a matter of fact. So the players are now fighting these things, which they realize are just too strong. And they flee, which is wonderful. And so now they could come back in the future to find more of these books or to try and salvage these books. Right, approximating distance. This is something that frequently comes up. I was looking during combat, there were lots of squares and people were starting to count. I'm like, blah, 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 blah. That's 40 feet-ish, that's 60 feet-ish, that's within range, it's within range. You move from this part of the town to that part of the town in the roll of a d6. Maybe you get lucky, maybe you don't get lucky, whatever. We don't need to be hyper accurate all the time. Some player groups though like that. And so then you should do that. So now to your questions. You have very patiently sat through almost 30 minutes of this. I thought it was supposed to be shorter. So first question was keeping information secret, when to share with players or write notes. So for example, the Lich offering the deal to Avery. I will tell you who murdered you if you join me. I could have done it as a note written to the player character. For me, the decision is always this. Where's the drama? This goes to another question, which was the meta-knowledge that the players have of having played in the future. Now the characters in the past, they've got future knowledge, that meta-knowledge. Meta-knowledge, meta-gaming, where the player knows stuff that the character doesn't. If you've got good players, and all of my players are amazing, what that does is that adds a level to your game. That adds the meta-game on top of your game. So rather than the metagame interfering with the game, where the players are going, oh, no, we know this, so we're going to avoid that. My players are going to be playing this metagame going, oh my God, you told us this in the future. We can't act on it. We have to follow what we would do, which is to fall into the trap. They will play those two levels of game like professionals. They really will, because, and what that does is that it allows us to have these two levels of this game running at the same time. The player game and then the actual role-playing game. That might not appeal to everybody, in which case then secret notes, write it down, send it off. Now there are times where I will use secret notes purposefully to screw with the metagame game and not with the reality game. Because my players are playing this, I like to tempt, I like to tease, I like to offer little bits of tension when I can. That's one way of doing it. So I'm gaming the meta game as well as the regular game. When Georgie's head was trying to save against exploding, it would have exploded if she had rolled a natural 1. I don't have an issue with killing the character off. Remember, the characters, and this is another question, the characters did not go back in time. The characters sent knowledge to the past. Now, as our Professor Gottfried would tell us, temporal mechanics is a complete waste of time. It means nothing. So what my players have done in the future is no longer in stone. They have already changed that future. I do not believe in, although it's probably the case, predetermined outcomes, that whatever you do is irrelevant because it is exactly what you would have been doing, and so therefore everything happens. I don't hold truck with that personally as a creator. So that to me is whatever they're doing now is changing that outcome. So if Georgie died saving the air, well, that's the cause. That is the outcome. Why was she in the future then? Well, because in that moment, she did something different. It's not an alternate dimension. I'm not J.J. Abramsing this. It is just how time works in my head. Anyway, right, so there we go. Do you plan on releasing maps, stat blocks, or the campaign outline? Nope, I don't do stat blocks. I make the monsters up as I go on the fly. I do them as I need them. I'm not going to be stuck going, oh, there isn't a monster that doesn't fit my exact plan. No, I don't do that. I look at it, I take the character level, I add 5, and then I move on. Generally speaking. Will I be releasing the maps? yes, they are coming out every month to the Patrons. If you are a patron, you are getting the entire Braxia setting. It's not the campaign, it is the world setting, which would include any maps that I make that are of significance to the world setting. So, for example, the city map of Howden Lee is included in that set. Right, meta-knowledge I've spoken about. Did the players go back in time? Okay, no, I've spoken about all of that. All right, so there you are. Now, what is my plan moving forward? I don't have a plan. I am now playing my game. I'm no longer in charge. I'm now playing it. And I've got so many cool things. The player backstories are so rich and so full of stuff. I'm like, I can't wait to get into them. I kind of almost want this whole thing now to be over so we can start digging into their backstories. I've got characters. I've got the young prince who is being very, very, very exposed to basically Avery. Avery is playing with the prince's mind, and if the prince doesn't turn into a sadistic evil creature in the future, I don't know what. So I've got the prince to play with. I've got the Lich, and I've got all of his evil lords to play with. There's so much that I have got going on. I can't wait to play again. I'm like, I get to play all these things. And just as of today of the recording of this video, one of my players reached out to me and said, so, what about this love interest? And I'm like, oh, yes. Oh, yes, bring the love interest. Mainly, I will, take them hostage. I will have them have a calamity that requires magical intervention. I will have them support the PCs. I will have them drive the PCs forward. I will have them act as mentors for the PCs. I've got so many things I can do with a love interest. Bring them in, please. So for the next batch of episodes, if you've got questions, throw them into the comments so that I can see them, and then I will add them here. And then I will do another video in a couple weeks' time. And talk to me about this episode. Was it too rambling? Was it too complicated? Was it too involved? Is this what you are looking for? Or should I make it briefer? Hit that like button if you like that video. Subscribe if you want to get alerts as to when all of these wonderful videos are coming out. And until next time, a huge thank you to my amazing editor who makes these shows that much punchier and pacier and nicer and awesome and awesome and awesome and awesome. And of course to my wonderful patrons. Until next time, I wish you and yours the happiest of gaming.